Mr. Charles Schultz, thank you for joining us today and for inviting us up.
My pleasure. I'm glad you're here.
Would you tell us something about your career work with the Peanut Strip and how you got started with that?
I always liked cartoons, and ever since I was a little kid, I was a great follower of all of the different comics in the newspapers, and I knew that if you worked hard, possibly you could get to draw your own comic strip. So this is the one thing that I wanted to do all of my life, and I used to be able to draw Mickey Mouse and Popeye and those great characters when I was a little kid. And I would send in my drawings and get them rejected from the magazines and the newspapers and things like that. But it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I began, I could feel getting closer all of the time and getting better, where I knew that perhaps one day this would happen. So it was one of these things that took a long while. It took a lot of thinking and preparing and sending in different ideas. And then over a period of a few years, I discovered that editors seemed to like the cartoons that I drew about children the best. And I developed the formula of having these children say things which seem to be a little bit adult, although they aren't as adult as people seem to think. These are not little kids saying grown-up things. I think that if you really pay attention, you will discover that children say things which are adult in nature. So this is the way it happened, and I suppose, I think I really didn't get started till I was about 26 or 27 years old. But it's what I always wanted to do, and I got to do it, so I feel very fortunate.
Can you tell us about the characters?
I think the characters speak for themselves. I mean, that's a lot like asking a poet to explain his poem. The poem should explain itself. Now, the characters, I suppose Charlie Brown would obviously be the main character. He's the one around which all of the other characters revolve. And this is the way it is with everything. There's always one main character. I think each of the characters could easily carry a comic strip by himself or herself. But I think that's a bad idea too. So I think you have to have enough characters so that you don't become boring. I always have a great fear of being boring, but I have enough characters so it's like having a theater repertory company, and I can go from one character to another and make sure that I don't use the same ones over and over and over. Charlie Brown is a nice kid. I've always said that I think I would like to have had Charlie Brown as a neighbor when I was small, because I think he and I would like the same things, and we would have played ball together and enjoyed each other a lot. I had a dog when I was about 13 who was a lot like Snoopy, at least in appearance, but he was kind of a wild dog, and he had quite a vocabulary. I counted up once about 50 different words that I knew he understood. So in a way, he was a little bit the inspiration for Snoopy. The other characters are just parts of myself. I think it would be impossible to create characters and give them personalities unless they were a little bit of myself.
Do we see quite a bit of you in the Charlie Brown character, or is it more spread around all the time?
I think people would like to believe that I am Charlie Brown, but that would be foolish. I don't think it would be possible to create a character and not put a bit of yourself in that character. But I do think that if you read the comic strip every day, or if you read all of the books and you read what the characters do and say, you would find pretty much what I am like. because everything that I think about, everything that I do, goes into the strip itself.
Now, where did you come up with the name Snoopy?
The first name that I thought of for the dog was supposed to have been Sniffy. And I remember going uptown from where I was working at the time, and I was going past a bookstore, and they had a lot of magazines on a rack. And I saw a comic magazine there about a little dog named Sniffy, and I thought, oh, there goes the name of my dog. But then I recalled, as I was walking back after this little walk, that my mother had always said, if we ever have another dog, I think we should name him Snoopy. And I thought, well, that's even a better name. Now, oddly enough, and I'll bet you didn't know that, did you know that when Walt Disney was making Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, they had to think of names for those 7 characters, and Snoopy was one of the names that they thought of but was rejected. So I've always been grateful that they never used it.
Now, when you were a youngster, you said you wanted to do this someday. Did you have people around you saying you can't do that for a living?
Fortunately, I had a mother and father who did not ever say that. They didn't understand, of course, what it was I wanted to do. My dad loved reading the comics, but they had no way of really helping me. My dad paid for the correspondence course, which I took, and he was always worried that I was going to be able to find out how to do this and ever get a job doing it. But they never discouraged me. They never said, well, why don't you go off and try to be an attorney or a barber like me, like he was, or something like that. So I've always been grateful for the fact that they never discouraged me from trying to do what I wanted to do, although there must have been a lot of people who thought I would never make it. So, but you can't pay any attention to that. You have to do what you want to do, and don't listen to anybody.
Some of the characters in the strip are experiences, or do they reflect maybe things that you had going on in your childhood, or friends that you may have had? Any of that in there?
I do recall, and I think this is probably the basis for the whole strip. This could be the theme for the whole strip, and that would be that it's difficult to be a child. It's difficult to grow up, and it's difficult if you grow up in a neighborhood which may be difficult in itself. I think there's a real struggle that goes on out there on the playground, and as we become adults, we drift away from it, and we learn to protect ourselves. But there are always the mean kids on the playground. There are always the bullies around. There's always those terrible feelings of insecurity and the fears that we have that adults somehow, unfortunately, forget about. So in a way, you might say that this is the basis for the whole thing, that it is difficult to be a little kid. It's a constant struggle. So maybe that's really what it's all about.
How do you stay in touch with, what kids are feeling? Because obviously you do have it in the script so often. How do you not forget about that?
That probably is the most difficult part. The older you get, I think if you insulate yourself from other people, this could become a real problem. Now, I own, not far from here, just a couple blocks, what is regarded as the world's most beautiful ice arena. And I am there every morning where I have breakfast, and I see the children skate, and I talk to the mothers and the fathers in the building, and I'm always having this association with other people, and I go over there and I have lunch at noon and talk with other people. I don't do this deliberately in order to keep up on things, but I find that it is important. Of course, I do read a lot and try to keep up with what is going on without becoming overly indulgent on these things. But the older you get, I think the more risk there is of becoming a boring older person who just lives in the past. I can't live in the past, although I think a lot of us do think about the past, those of us who are cartoonists, and we draw upon things that happened to us, and then we have the knack of kind of turning these things around and making them a little bit funny.
American culture has changed so much over the past however many years. Has the strip and has Charlie Brown and the characters, have they changed with the times, or are they timeless?
I like to think that they are timeless. I suppose the humor might even be a little more gentle than it was way back when I first began. I imagine this has to do with my own aging. I think younger people deal in humor which is a little more harsh than what older people do. So if the strip has become more mild, I would say it's because of that I am a little more mild in my outlook of things than I was when I was small. I am a little bit disturbed, of course, the way I think in our culture that movies, television shows, and everything are becoming more and more outrageous and in some cases absolutely vulgar. It's become almost intolerable. I think I think this sort of writing has been released from the box, and I don't think it can ever be put back in again. And it's not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse all the time. And it's creeping little by little into comic strips, whereas it never used to be. Comic strips, when I was small, were probably the most highly censored form of entertainment that there was. But even comic strips are becoming a little bit tainted now, I think.
Is it easier to be vulgar?
Oh, definitely. It's much easier to be vulgar. I have been visited by people from what we call the underground comics, which can be as vulgar as you can get, you know. And I told one of the young men one day, I said, you know, what you do you think is so wonderful and so original, but I said it's very easy, and you all do the same things, you all do the same vulgar things, but I defy you to do what I have done for 45 years and have never done anything that is remotely vulgar or anything like that. You know, I don't think you guys can do it.
What do you think the responsibility is that you have to your audience?
Oh, I suppose there is a responsibility, but I never think about that outside of just trying to do something that's decent and uplifting. But I don't think that in any form of creativity you can really worry about your audience. I think that this is fatal. It would be impossible to sit down and decide you're going to make a nice painting, and you're going to paint this painting and say to yourself, I'm going to paint this because this is going to bring joy to people, or something like that. I think almost all forms of creativity are done by the person who's doing the creating himself or herself. You do it for yourself. I draw cartoons for myself, the same way as someone else might play the piano. They do it for themselves, or the painter who's doing watercolors is doing it for himself or herself. And you don't do it for other people, you do it to please yourself, and if you are fortunate, others like it. If they don't, there's really nothing much you can do about it anyway.
Would you tell us about the process of drawing strip on a daily basis? What is that like?
The hardest part, of course, is to come to the studio at the beginning of a week where you have no ideas, and you've finished your last week's work last Friday, and now it's Monday morning and you have to start all over again. If you're lucky, maybe you thought of something over the weekend, but if you haven't, you have to get rid of the morning's mail and see what was in the newspaper that day. And then you just take a blank sheet of paper and you just start trying to think of things. You think of Charlie Brown being on the pitcher's mound, or you think of Charlie Brown going out to feed his dog, or you think of Linus in his blanket, or all of the different things that you've done, and out of that you try to come up with something new, and before you know it, it's time to go out to lunch and you haven't thought of a thing. So it's been a morning wasted. But sometimes you think of something that's good, and that idea takes you on to something else. And so you reach over and you take your nice big sheet of paper and you start drawing it. Usually I put in all of the lettering first to get that out of the way, because you have to be able to space where the letters go and then the characters go and all of that. And I don't always finish up that strip at that time. I will set it aside because I know then how long it will take me to finish it. And then I take my pad of paper and I try to think of something else. And if I can think of another idea, then I will do the same and set that aside. And maybe when I have 3 of them aside, then I will know that maybe I can finish those. And if I can draw 3 of those daily comic strips in one day, then I'm quite content. It's been a good day. A Sunday page, which is much larger, they're big things, usually takes most of the day. So if it's a good week, sometimes you can finish up one week's strips by maybe Wednesday and then start over again and try to catch up so that you gain a week, and then you're always trying to gain another week. But I have a lot of interruptions and things that get in the way. And then, of course, there's always just the problem of not being able to think of something. Even though you may have a whole day to yourself without any planned interruptions, if you can't think of anything, then it's going to be a day wasted.
How far ahead have you worked ahead, for instance, today? How far into the future?
Right now, I would only have about 2 weeks that I wouldn't have to do anything. That would be on the daily strips. My Sunday pages, I've caught up a little bit the last few weeks, so I wouldn't have to draw another Sunday page for about a month. But I'm never behind. I'm always at least on the schedule, but generally 2 or 3 weeks ahead. But there isn't such a thing really as a vacation. It's like it's like saving up money, but not putting it in the bank. There's no interest on it. So if you want to take a week off, then you have to double up and get a week ahead. But you always think it better be something pretty important, because you don't want to waste that good week that you've worked so hard to gain. Never ends.
You've made a decision that's, I believe, a bit unusual in the cartooning world, that once you pass away, nobody will continue drawing the strip. Can you talk about that and how you came to that?
I didn't come to that decision. That was the decision that was made by my children. It's very flattering, and it's nice to know that they think enough about their dad and about what I have done that they don't want to see this comic strip ruined by someone else trying to carry it on. And so in our last contract negotiation several years ago, they told the attorneys, they said, we don't want anyone else drawing Dad's strip. So when I die, the strip will end. And I think that's the way it should be. Everything has to end sometime, and I've seen it happen too often that comic strips have been carried on by others. And it's a very individual medium. I can think of very few that have been carried on well by someone else, because you are putting your whole being into this. And I doubt very much if it can be done well by someone else.
I've seen so many different items that have the various characters and so forth. What kind of things, in addition to the strip, have you been involved with, or have maybe licensed to, and so forth?
Well, I suppose our most successful relationship has been with the Hallmark greeting cards. I was told recently that Hallmark has sold over 1 billion of our Peanuts cards. It's been the biggest item that they have ever had. And now, of course, we have the Metropolitan Insurance Company using the characters to promote Metropolitan. And then, of course, all of our television shows have been pretty much a success. A man named Lee Mendelson came up with the idea of doing that. And there was a fine woman named Connie Boucher who was the founder of a company called Determined Productions, and it was her idea to put out these yearly date books. We were the first ones ever to do that. Now everybody has them. So those have been very successful relationships. We've always been fortunate, I think, to be associated with good companies, and that's been quite gratifying.
How are your children, are they involved in any way in the work in the company?
No, my children have nothing to do with it. None of them can draw. All of my children are quite witty, and when we are together, we do laugh a lot. They are all very athletic. I have one son who's a good hockey player, another son who is an airplane pilot and is also very, very good at taking part in motocross races. He's good at that. And I have another daughter who is probably the nation's foremost expert on the raising and training of mules, which is rather strange, but she's good at that. And then, of course, my youngest daughter is an expert with inline skates and is now promoting inline skating shows. She used to be with the Ice Follies as a professional skater. So we're all quite athletic and we all do different things, and like I said, they are all kind of funny and witty, and we laugh a lot when we are together, but not one of them can draw.
There's a story that you tell that I've never forgotten about the young lady who you proposed to. Would you tell us that story?
I worked at the correspondence course in Minneapolis called Art Instruction Schools, and our department was, I think, on the 3rd floor, and she worked for the accounting department. She was a little red-haired girl, and she worked as one of the bookkeepers. And we met when I was the coach of the girls' softball team, and I think she played second base, and I liked her a lot right from the start. And we used to go out now and then, but she had another boyfriend too. And I always said that I would never get involved in a romance where I was competing with someone else. Anyway, I went to New York in the spring of 1950, and I had met with the people at United Feature Syndicate, and I signed the contract to start drawing the Peanut strip, and came back and proposed to her, but she married the other fellow, which is a bitter blow, you know, to be turned down. It's worse than losing a tennis match or a golf match or anything like that, because it's the whole you that has been rejected.
Does she make an appearance in the strip?
No. I've never shown her. I got the idea, of course, from that whole episode, but I think all of us can relate somehow to unrequited love. We have all fallen in love with somebody across a crowded room and never met the person, and I think it's something that all of us can relate to. So I use this theme quite often in the strip. Lucy likes Schroeder and he can't stand her. I think Peppermint Patty probably likes Charlie Brown, but she's not sure why. Charlie Brown likes the little red-haired girl, and Snoopy's fallen in love with a few other dogs now and then, but I think the last dog that he fell in love with ran away with a golden retriever, so that broke his heart too. So it's given me the opportunity for a lot of ideas.